Hello, I'm Liselle Sambury, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things traditional publishing, writing, and a little bit of reading. And today we are diving into the next section of the Save the Cat Deep Dive series. If you don't know, this is a series that I do on my channel where I talk about the story structure that was popularized and named by Blake Snyder. He has a whole book about it. I read the book called Save the Cat Writes a Novel that was written later. I will have links for both of those books before. That book was written by Jessica Brody. And essentially what I do in this series is I break down each of the beats in that story structure and I talk about how I use them in my writing and my storytelling and share that with you in the hopes that it is helpful for you and your process. None of this is prescriptive. I'm not saying you have to do this or this is how it is. I'm not a Save the Cat expert. This is just what I do and what I find helpful. And so if you also find it helpful, hopefully this series will be illuminating for you. And today we are talking about the Dark Night of the Soul. So I'm going to go ahead and read the description. But before I do that, because I almost forgot, there are links below for the whole playlist of me doing this. And so if you have never heard of Save the Cat, first I recommend reading one of those books first, and then I recommend going to the start to watch this series. I also have another video about creating complex characters, and I put that down below as well, just because I reference that quite a bit in these videos, just so you have the whole primer going into this video in the series. And now I will read what Save the Cat Writes a Novel defines for this beat. Sorry if I sound a little bit weird. I'm a little bit congested. I just got over a cold a little while ago. And so I'm better now, but I think that sometimes my voice still sounds a little bit congested. But anyway, the description for Dark Night of the Soul is how your hero reacts to the all is lost and breaks through to a resolution. Save the Cat also notes that this is like another debate, and this is 5% of the novel and the final beat in the second act. So let's go ahead and dive in. I like to think of Dark Night of the Soul as the wallowing beat. It is where your character is going to have time to wallow and to basically feel bad about whatever happened in that all is lost beat, which I talked about in the last video I posted. Link is in the description. If you haven't watched that video, if you didn't listen to me in the beginning, you're skipping around, at the very least, go and watch the All is Lost video before coming to watch this one. So yeah, that's kind of how I in myself picture it and how I help myself structure the beat, because I think of it as like this is their time to wallow. Though Save the Cat notes that they don't just have to be sad during this beat. They can in fact be angry, they can be in denial. It is all about their reaction to all is lost. So however they as a character choose to react to that is what you're going to see in this beat. And so it doesn't always have to be sad, tears, depression. It can be, like righteous anger or anything like that. But what I will say about this beat is that I try and give my character a goal or something to do during this time, because it can be very easy, especially because it's like 5% of the book and will tend to be like a chapter or two. It can be really easy to have it become a sort of meandering beat, because you're like, oh, they're just gonna like wallow and be sad, but nobody wants to read about the character just kind of like, well, I won't say that because maybe it depends on your story, but it's just depending on what sort of story you're doing, it might be very boring and unengaging for the reader if your character just kind of like Charlie Brown walks around feeling sad for themselves. And so that's why I try and give the character a goal, because then it kind of gives the story some forward momentum, even though this is still a beat where they're very much reflecting on everything that has happened and all is lost. So for example, say you have a character and in the all is lost beat, their mentor died. So their mentor, the person that was helping them through, has just died. They are now kind of very unmoored. They don't know what they're going to do because that person was helping them through. And now it's kind of like, oh, I have no one. I don't know what I'm going to do from here. And so I might give them a goal of going to break the news, say to their mentor's like partner, going to tell them the fact that their mentor has died. And so this gives them a goal. It gives them something to do. And it's interesting for the reader because the reader is like, oh my God, what is going to happen when they go to tell this person that they're dead? Especially because the thing about All Is Lost is that what happens there is due in some part to something that the main character has done. It's due in some part to the main character's flaw. And so presumably the main character has some sort of guilt over what has happened. And so they can kind of react in whatever way works for this beat, for their progress when they go and tell the partner that. So they can be angry, about what happened, or maybe the partner reacts badly and they can get angry at them. They can kind of misplace their anger. They could be very sad. They could be begging for forgiveness. There's so many different things that they can do in that scene. And so you still give them that wallowing time. You still give them that reaction time to what happened, but you're doing something that is pushing the story forward and like giving them something to do. And so that's kind of why I think, it's helpful to have the casual name of the wallowing beat. That you don't want to get caught into a trap of nothing happening. If you're stumped about what your character's goal should be and what you should be having them do during this beat, since we already established that we kind of want to give them some sort of goal, what you can do is you can do what Save the Cat calls a return to the familiar. So from the beginning of the story, when we went from the Act 1 world to the Act 2 world, the point was that they could not go back. So they were forced to go into that Act 2 world because whatever happened in that catalyst made it impossible for them to return to the status quo. And so that's important. So that is how everything shook out, and that was kind of a determining factor. However, Dark Night of the Soul is the point where you can allow them to go back into the Act 1 world. You can allow them to try and fit back into the world that they were in before. So let's say, for example, you had a main character and they were kind of working in a fantasy pub and they were dreaming of adventures, but they felt like, I can't do it because that's for special people. And I'm not special in any way, and so I can't be an adventurer. Like, I can't be that sort of person. And that's kind of the lie that they believe, which is like, that's only for special people and I'm not special. And so they might decide, okay, I'm going to go back to working at the fantasy pub. And let's tie this all together because why not? This is the same character that had their mentor die. And so, their mentor dies and all is lost. And they think, you know what? I'm just going to go right back. I'm going to go back to exactly where I was before and just pretend none of this happened. But that's not really going to go well for them. And I'm going to talk about that in this next little section. This is where we come to the Dark Night Epiphany. So according to Save the Cat, this is the moment when the main character realizes the truth. And so for me and my story structure and how I put that all together, I think of it really as the moment when the character realizes that the lie they believed this whole time, is in fact a lie. So they finally come to that realization. This is something they've been working on the entire novel. When the midpoint hit, they started to question that lie a lot more. They've been questioning that lie significantly more, increasingly more, this whole second act. And then this Dark Night Epiphany is when they finally get to the point where they think, that's wrong. Like, that's a lie. Like, no, that's not how the world actually is. And so that is the Dark Night Epiphany that you are building to in this entire beat, really. So with the example of our character, our adventurer who has just lost their mentor, you can kind of do this two ways. So the first way is that these aren't the only ways you can do it. I just mean from the examples we've already been talking about, here are kind of two example ways that you could do this, given what we have already discussed. There are infinite ways you could do this. So in that return to the familiar example, so they go back to work at this pub, let's say, and what really kind of is going to become increasingly clear to them is they kind of don't fit in here anymore. They cannot actually just go exactly back to the way they are before, because they've already been on this journey of realizing that the lie might not be true. And so they're not quite fitting properly. And then there's something that kind of brings on this dark night epiphany. So in the case of this pub, you might have it happen that like some like people come in to like maybe like rough around the pub people. And maybe this happened all the time when they worked at the pub before, all the time. And they always just never did anything and waited for the heroes to show up because they're not special. They cannot, be adventurous. They can't be that sort of person because only special people can do that. That's the lie they believe. But they're watching this happen and they're kind of like, but I can do something. Like my mentor has taught me all of this stuff. I have all these things I've learned. They might even be thinking in that moment, like, what would my mentor think of me watching me stand back here doing nothing when I have the ability to help? And so they might kind of like jump in the fray. Their coworkers might be like, what are you doing? You're not special. We wait for the special people to do that. And then they can have this moment of like, I don't need to be special. We don't have to wait for special people. I myself, exactly as I am, can do something about this. And they do something about it. And that becomes their big epiphany moment where they're like, oh, this was never about being special. That was a lie. And so that can be their big dark night moment. Or alternatively, when they're visiting the mentor's partner to break the news of the mentor dying, maybe the partner like gets mad at them and is like, this is your fault. They shouldn't have been helping you. Who are you even? You're like some villager from a pub. You're nothing. You're nobody. And the main character can kind of like have this righteous indignation. This is a point where like they can be angry and they can be like, no, like it never mattered that I was special. And my mentor always told me that and I didn't believe them. But now they have this feeling of, yes, that never mattered. I could have always done it. And if I had just kind of, they might even be thinking if I just kind of believed in myself, maybe I could have saved my mentor. But also I never needed to be a special person to do this. And they can kind of like, shout back the grieving spouse. But you know what I mean? Like it's their moment to come to that understanding. And part of that, in the return to familiar is them trying to return to that Act 1 world and not fitting, whereas like this second option is kind of them asserting themselves within the Act 2 world. So those are kind of two examples of how you can do that. And so you might be thinking, okay, so they realized the lie was a lie, arc over. Story done, let's dust our hands off. Good job. But how is there like a whole other act after this? Like, how are we not done? And so the reason for this is that it's basically like this is their first realization. But that doesn't mean they've become kind of fully actualized or reached the end of their arc. So this is kind of just like that moment where they're like, okay, I've had my epiphany. To me, I kind of think of it like, realizing you have anxiety. You haven't yet done anything about it. You kind of just, you're like, oh, that's what this was all along. But you haven't like learned any strategies. You haven't like, talked with a therapist or sought medication. You haven't been challenged in any way. And it hasn't kind of made the anxiety, for you resolve or become manageable. It's just kind of, you're like, oh, that's what that is. And that's what I have. This is perhaps not the greatest metaphor, but that's kind of how it helps me to think of it. The characters really just realize this, but they still need to be challenged on this. They need to be pushed. They need to have their new belief really kind of shoved against them. They need to have situations in which they could fall back into believing the lie and kind of stay steadfast and like keep going with it. Nothing has really happened to them yet. They've had this belief and they haven't kind of been pushed to double down on it and to be like, yes, no, this is something I'm very firm with. And so that's why the story isn't over. You're just getting kind of this actualization point for them. Then we get into this debate. So when I defined this beat, way back in the beginning of this video, I talked about how Save the Cat says this is another debate. So the debate in the first act was basically, what do I do next? And it's the same in the case of Dark Night of the Soul. So they've had their time to wallow, they've had their Dark Night epiphany, and so where the next step is really is, where do I go next? And the character deciding, where am I going to go from here? And so what is also important to remember is the beat that comes after this is the break into 3. So just like in the first act, we had the debate and then we had the break into 2. So they were deciding where to go next, and then where they decided to go in the break into 2 was fixing things the wrong way. So here they have their debate at the end of the second act, and when they're moving into their break into 3, what they're deciding to do is fixing things the right way. So keep that in mind when you are deciding this. So basically kind of whatever they decide to do to go forward into that Act 3 world should be based on their needs. It should be based on chasing after what they need and not what they want, because now they've had this actualization. They know the lie is false. And so they finally can be like, okay, I wanted this thing all along, and this is really what I need to get to this point. And so from there, they can kind of decide whatever it is. I don't think they necessarily need to have like the right decision here. Like they can kind of maybe not make the best decision into going into what they need and then kind of come back to it later, or they can go kind of into the right direction right away. When you get into the whole Act 3, we'll talk about all kind of obstacles and that sort of thing. But you can kind of decide from there where to go. If you want, you can structure it exactly kind of like the debate prior, in which they're kind of having this choice. So in the case of this character, maybe the people at the pub are like, oh my God, you're so amazing now that you like saved us from these people. Do you want your new job at the pub to be like our security person and like you like protect the pub? And so they might have a choice then of like, do I stay and protect the pub, which will give me that thing that I need? Or should I go chase after what me and my mentor were trying to do, which might also give me what I need? And so you can kind of present it that way and kind of give them two decisions. I suppose, end up with very decisive characters around this time, which is perhaps not great. Perhaps I should make them struggle and debate a little bit more. But I tend to end up having very decisive characters at this point who are kind of like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So you can also do that. You can kind of have them just be like, you know what? I can't stay in this pub. I gotta go do what my mentor wanted me to do, or I can't stay talking to the mentor's spouse. I gotta go do this other thing. Whatever that thing might be, it just kind of depends on your story and your character. So it might be them, finishing the quest that them and their mentor started. It might be them going in a new direction that they've discovered during this epiphany that maybe them and their mentor didn't think about, or it might even be them being like, maybe I avenge my mentor. Who knows? It's kind of just whatever direction works best for that and works best for getting you to that point. But it is, I think the main thing to keep in mind is that they should be chasing that need at this point. And just in case you're thinking, how could avenging the mentor be fixing things the right way? Like, isn't revenge always bad? But this is what I mean when it depends on your story. So for example, the mentor might have wanted them to go after this person, and maybe the main character was kind of too scared because they were like, let's do this different roundabout thing that will get us some sort of result but won't make us directly confront the big bad. And then the big bad might have been the person that killed the mentor. And so even though you can be like, is revenge justified, etc., for the character's journey, that might be going after what they need, because it might be forcing them to confront this kind of big bad that they were trying to avoid this whole time. Maybe they avoid confrontation and like that's their whole thing. In which case, going after that person both fulfills the need and also avenges the mentor. So that's how that could kind of work. I realized after I said that, I was like, that kind of seems like going backwards. But again, depending on your story, it might not be. And so this is why I mean, like, there are really infinite options. And going off on a little tangent here, if you'll indulge me, I think this is one of those things where, you know, sometimes people will be like using a story structure, like, doesn't that feel so prescriptive? Doesn't that feel like you'll end up with the exact same story as everyone else? And no, because there's so many different ways that you can play within the same structure and end up with a very different story within the exact same structure. And that is it for this Dark Night of the Soul Save the Cat deep dive video. I hope that was helpful to you. And I'll remind you that I have a video which is a combination of Break Into 2 and Break Into 3. So now that you've gone through this video of watching Dark Night of the Soul, the next video is that one. So it's just a little bit different because that video came out earlier. Just so you don't get confused, I'll also link it down below to help you out as well. So that's the next video you're going to go to after this one. And then I'm going to be posting the final beat video. So it's going to be a combination of the finale and the final image. So the last 2 beats, and I'm going to post that video in December. So before the year ends, we will have completed all of the beats in this series, which is very exciting. I am going to be doing a video that's going to be the full beat sheet, just like making a complete, full, detailed one exactly the way I would do it using kind of like a fake story. Thankfully, I did a workshop not that long ago where I had to basically do that. So I do kind of have something in place. I just need to rearrange it and get all the pieces together. And so I'm going to post that probably next year in 2024 because it's going to take me a little bit to get into it. And then I'm not sure where I might go from there. Potentially, if people want, I might do maybe a Q&A video of like if people have questions about things about Save the Cat or, you know, how I've put all my stuff together, and I can try and answer those maybe. But otherwise, I think that full beat sheet will kind of be the ending video, and then I'll move on to some other crap videos, I guess. But I digress. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!